On Sunday, when I was making movie math, I noted that The Matrix Resurrections had already dropped out of the top 10, while other movies released the very same day were still up there. Not necessarily going strong, but at least still in the top 10. While The Matrix, having again fallen out, was finishing its run with about 36.6 million total domestic. Damn! Woo! So while we've been focusing on the amazing box office success of No Way Home, I thought it would be interesting to take a moment and look at some of the shocking flops, floppity flop, of 2021. Due to the pandemic, and some that can't totally blame the pandemic. So I'd be very curious to hear your own thoughts about these flops down below as we go through them. And we're also going to have an interesting look at streaming, because let's start with The Matrix Resurrections, which of course involves an HBO Max discussion. So this is shockingly low compared to the original trilogy, even with inflation working in its favor, because of course numbers are higher these days. Now sure, it debuted day and date on HBO Max, yet both Dune and Godzilla vs. Kong were able to still cross the century mark domestic. And I think that speaks specifically to the quality of the fourth Matrix, which makes comments from Warner Bros brass that they still want to keep Lana Wachowski around going forward perplexing, at the least. Of all the day and date releases from Warner Brothers, Matrix Resurrections wasn't able to top smaller, less historic franchises like Looney Tunes and Mortal Kombat, although that does show how valuable those franchises are to Warner Brothers. But The Matrix Resurrections wasn't the only box office debacle to come from the day and date release experiment from Warner Brothers. Look at this, The Little Things, King Richard, Malignant, The Many Saints of Newark, although that's all quality on that one, and I think too loose a connection to the original Sopranos series. Also, it was a bit of a benefit in that it made people go rewatch The Sopranos on the service. I checked it out for the first time, and I fell in love with that show, as many of you had told me I would. And then, of course, Those Who Wish Me Dead. All of those movies, as you can see, had shockingly low box office domestic totals. Denzel's genre movies usually clear at least 75 million. Will Smith awards fare, even his less popular ones, they still usually clear 30 million. And while Angelina Jolie's box office track record has been spotty lately, she can usually clear double digits, for Pete's sake. And that's the second lowest domestic gross of James Wan's career, the first being way back when he got started before he was a household name in 2007. And Warner Brothers lost even more money on many of these movies as usual, because you can recall they had to offer up big payouts to placate big stars who hadn't signed on for digital co-releases. The Suicide Squad is more in the middle of the pack with this year's Warner Bros. HBO Max releases, but it's a DC film, and it was supposed to be an improvement on a film that actually made quite a bit of money despite all the complaints about it. And that couldn't hit 100 million either. That should have also been up there with Dune and Godzilla vs. Kong. And the Suicide Squad doesn't make up for it when you factor in overseas either. Dune and Godzilla vs. Kong are still much stronger. Suicide Squad should have been up there. So I would include that on this list as well. As maybe flop is too strong a word, but certainly a disappointment. What did this big splashy play do for HBO Max subs? Well, because that was the whole point of it, right? Well, HBO and HBO Max, which are now bundled together in terms of Warner Brothers reporting their subscriber numbers, started 2021 with 61 million global subs and ended with 73.8 million. Not a huge amount of growth considering the major movies that were put on the service. For comparison's sake, Disney Plus has 118 million global subscribers currently, and if they bundle Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus, their total is 179 million subscribers worldwide. Netflix, of course, is still king with 220 million, but with subscriber growth finally slowing down this past quarter, their stock took a noticeable hit last week. If streaming services reach a point where they can't grow subscriptions at a compelling rate, and they're publicly traded companies, how will they grow revenue? Microtransactions? That's all I can think of, although you don't see Premier Access around anymore, do you? Since Disney Plus has found much more success with releasing movies at no extra cost to just bring you over to the service or keep you subscribed. Sorry, Pixar, you've been sacrificed for the greater good of Disney Plus, which is very I mean, even if these things stay stagnant, they still are generating a huge amount of revenue for their respective companies at a regular rate. But And churn is keeping people from dropping subs and then coming back for another show. They want to keep you subscribed constantly. But Wall Street likes to see growth, so you have to have different sources of revenue somehow generated if it won't be additional subscribers. So I'm very curious to see how streaming evolves in the near future, because that's becoming a reality already. On that note, I want to include Black Widow on this list, as I think, as ScarJo and her team does, that the day-and-date premiere access release did leave money on the table. In hindsight, Black Widow came out at a time when the pandemic was at one of its low points, and as the first Marvel movie back after a 2-year hiatus, it should have performed more along the lines of Shang-Chi, or maybe even greater if it hadn't split its audience and certainly hurt its rewatchability factor, because the price point on Disney Plus was a one-time purchase, which had unlimited rewatches after that. I think Shang-Chi is a far better film, but Black Widow wasn't a horrible movie, and I think, I've seen worse Marvel movies do better. And so I think that it probably would have done better if not for that. So I think that, when we're looking at box office records, no one's going to factor in what it did on streaming, on Premier Access. So Black Widow is hurt in that regard in terms of its reputation. And that's a serious problem for her. Scarlett Johansson is an actress and Black Widow is a character, especially since so many people, I think, take pot shots at Black Widow, who is a very cool character. Thank you very much. All right, so anyway. Disney had some other flops in 2021, aka Fox movies, that the Disney PR machine is still figuring out how to market. Disney does a very good job with brands and franchises, but these Fox movies are, that's not what Fox historically did. And also, these movies are reliant on older moviegoers who still aren't comfortable going to the multiplex during the pandemic. West Side Story is the biggest flop here. A Steven Spielberg $100 million musical, not even counting how much was spent on advertising, which was, I'm sure, significant. It only hit $60 million worldwide. And remember, studios keep about just 50% of that. That is a horrible return on investment. And it isn't dominating the awards race either. Sure, it won some Golden Globes from the much maligned, or deservedly so, Hollywood Foreign Press Association. But SAG shut it out of its Best Picture equivalent, and we'll see how it does at the Oscars. It's certainly, I would not say, a front runner. But at least it's part of the awards conversation. While Lin-Manuel Miranda's In the Heights, another Warner Bros HBO Max box office misfire, has been shockingly totally left out of that conversation. Disney's release of Fox's Nightmare Alley has also been a complete disaster. I loved that movie. It's such a shame. The biggest flop of Guillermo del Toro's Hollywood career, and a movie that hasn't really been at all a part of the awards conversation, except for one little nomination for Cate Blanchett over at SAG. As for other movies that aren't materializing on the awards front or at the box office and are director career low points, we've got Last Night in Soho, not a return to form for Edgar Wright after Baby Driver. He was hoping to gain some momentum, and it took so long between the two movies too. He still is unable to escape the shadow of being taken off Ant-Man for creative differences. That just continues to haunt him, not just professionally, but I think personally as well, as he still is too much acting like someone who has something to prove instead of just focusing on his upcoming films. That's just the feel I get from Edgar Wright. He really needs to have more successes to just leave that behind him. Wes Anderson's The French Dispatch is his biggest flop since 2007's Darjeeling Limited, reversing the substantial box office growth he'd achieved with the fabulous The Grand Budapest Hotel, which put him on the verge of being a mainstream player in Hollywood, but now he's back to being niche. And Dear Evan Hansen, a major Broadway sensation and Tony winner across the board, crashed and burned because it's a horrific adaptation and highlights all the problems with the musical, as we discussed. It might have single-handedly ruined or at least significantly hobbled the careers of star Ben Platt, who originated the role on Broadway and whose father even produced this movie and, strong-armed his son into taking over the role, even though clearly it was a bad idea, and also director Stephen Chbosky. Ben Platt has a couple of projects already underway, while Stephen Chbosky only has one thing, a Prince Charming script for Disney, actually. He also worked on Beauty and the Beast, but that was back in 2017, and that hasn't gone anywhere. So Ben Platt, if one of those things that he's working on hits, he could, somehow survive. But the fact that Chbosky doesn't have anything cooking right now is a big problem for him. That's why you always want your next project to start going before your current one comes out, just in case it's a disaster. Finally, as for more commercial films that failed to launch in 2021, Paramount was unable to successfully relaunch G.I. Joe with its Snake Eyes origin story. I liked the film quite a bit, as you know, but it is a disaster. It is a far cry from the box office of the first two movies, which nobody even liked those films, and has cast serious doubt on Henry Golding's ability to lead a franchise. If I were a studio head, I would be nervous to put him in a lead role after he failed to bring anybody in for this. And it's a shame. He was so good in the movie. Everybody was. And speaking of star power, Milla Jovovich laughs last as Sony failed spectacularly to continue the Resident Evil franchise without her. I wonder if they'll maybe try and entice her to come back. Then there's Candyman, a movie Jordan Peele didn't direct but produced and lent his name to the point that many people actually mistakenly felt that he did direct it. Nia DaCosta directed it, of course, and I think she did a fabulous job directing it, in fact. Its directing was its strongest point visually. And I'm excited to see her work on the Marvels. But this film, from a business perspective, did not work out. The film, I think, eroded his reputation as a hitmaker. Not only was Jordan Peele's, and I think it hurt Nia DaCosta just a little bit as well. But again, what did I tell you about having another project already lined up? She's doing the Marvels, and you can only it's Marvel. She's part of the Marvel family. So anyway, not only was Candyman's box office significantly lower than Get Out and Us, but it was another B cinema score for a Peele project after his initial A- for Get Out. You wanted to make the Us be an anomaly instead of make it seem like the A- was the anomaly, right? Hopefully he can rally with this year's Nope. He also had a project already going. So what do you think of 2021's flops? Which do you find shocking and which do you think are totally expected? And then what do you think of Warner Bros HBO Max Play in the rearview mirror and the future of streaming services as subscriber growth begins to slow? How do you think they'll find ways to continue to grow revenue if they can't get a significant number of new subscribers? Share those thoughts down below. Subscribe today here to be on the trailer. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.